Hello and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and we are back, baby. We are back with bonus episodes once more to get us rocking and rolling through summer. I have been recording so much lately, I feel like, to try and get ahead of the game because I will be starting grad school in July. But with all of that being said, I am here today to present a bonus interview with Nick Cutter. You may know him as Craig Davidson, who wrote the Saturday Night Ghost Club, but under his other name, Nick Cutter, you know him from The Troop, The Deep, The Queen, and then this year, The Dorians, which is a really, really fascinating book that makes you think about aging and getting older and what it means to kind of have mortality or be mortal in this life. So, it's a signature Nick Cutter book with lots of bad scientists, bad science, and people with too big egos, which are all things that we talk about. So, I hope that you all enjoyed this conversation, and I will catch up with you guys after. Alrighty, hello, Nick. Welcome to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, I'm super, super delighted to get you on the podcast. I feel like I've been reading you both as Craig Davidson and as Nick Cutter for quite a few years now. So the pleasure is all mine to get you on the podcast. And I invited you on to talk about The Dorians, which is your most recent release with Gallery Books. And it's been out for about a week now. And so I wanted to see
Yeah.
how's it been feeling with another book under your belt.
Well, excuse me as I have a libation here. Everyone is. I hate to sound like a grand old man of this at this point, but as you know, this is not going to be broadcast in terms of people seeing my face. But if they could, they would see a lot of snow in the beard at this point. So I think it's a matter of having done quite a few books now under my own name and under Nick Cutter. It never gets easier in a weird way.
Hmm.
And I know you speak to a lot of authors, and there's an excitement, but it's actually also paralleled by a certain amount of existential terror, and that never seems to change. You sort of ride the roller coaster with each of these books. But at this point, like for me, it's usually the intense part is we're in the crucible now. The first couple weeks,
Yeah.
um, and it comes out, and you sort of do some interviews, and you sort of see what the initial reaction is, which I don't even really do that anymore. I sort of become a mole person, and don't subject myself to any kind of the review attention that may accumulate, and obviously that needs to happen, right? So and then you just sort of you exist with the work that you put into the book, and you ideally feel that you've done the front loading work of writing what you felt that was the most authentic and meaningful book you could at the time. And then you really have to move on. I mean, I don't know that all authors do, but my own sort of mental shell game that I play with myself means
Yeah.
that I sort of I write it, I do what publicity that I can to the best of my ability, and then you sort of just have to say, hey, little bird, fly or don't fly, as the case may be, and you move on to the next one. You realize too that books can have interesting lives. There are some books that are out of the box hits, and they just sort of go on to excellence, and
Hmm.
others sort of come out, and maybe they get forgotten about, and then there's some fantastic turn of events that sort of it gets rediscovered. So I've done this long enough to see all different things kind of happen. So that also makes it easier just to kind of move on. But yeah, the initial couple of weeks are a bit of a stress factory, frankly.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine because I you spent I've talked to enough authors now, especially in the traditional publishing sense, even with indie publishing, it's a little bit faster paced, but traditionally published stuff, you are sitting with it for a very long time in solitude, even before it gets to editors and agents and all that stuff. Like just the drafting process alone takes a while. And then with traditionally publishing, that process takes a very, very long time. And and I get why, but it's almost like a false sense of comfort. I feel like I imagine that you almost develop is like, oh, well, it's done and it's over. And then it's actually, no, just kidding. This book isn't even out yet. You know, we haven't even
Yes.
started promo. We haven't even started, like all this other stuff. So it's always kind of a weird timeline, and I really sympathize and empathize with authors because, especially ones who write so much. Like this is book number what for you? I mean, this is, you know,
I'm
not
gonna
like
guess probably book number overall between my combined
yeah.
names, it probably 20 at
Yeah,
this.
exactly. So the life cycle of where your brain kind of follows those books, it feels kind of like a curly cue, right? Like you spend the
Yes.
entire time drafting, and you're like, oh, on the downhill, okay, I'm done, and then oh wait, we got to pick back up, and we're coming back around to it, and it's released, and then it's on to the next, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah, yeah. I feel like very much this there are some writers who are naturally sort of talented at the promotional aspect of it, whether that be really engaging social media presence or they'll go out and do 300 events. You know, I've known authors over time who have, and mainly that's like their own self-directed. You know, they just
Yeah,
get out there and they do it and they throw a bunch of books in their trunk and they just like go any single supper club, any single book club. I will drive to Timbuktu to read to 10 people. And I probably in my early part of my career there were all sorts of things that I would do. There's nothing I wouldn't have done,
yeah,
at that point to sort of to publicize a book. Um, at this point, it's more I do what I'm asked to do, and I'm very pleased and grateful to have those opportunities to do what I'm asked to do. But it does feel a little bit like I'm a groundhog that lives underground for most of the year. And then at some point, someone stuffs their hand down in my burrow and picks me up and waves me around in the sunlight and says, "Explain yourself. Explain this book. Explain, explain everything." And I'm like, sort of blinking into the light, going, "I'll do my best." But that's again, like, I'm deeply grateful to have this job. I don't consider it a job most days, so if talking to lovely people such as yourself is part of the operation of what it is to put a book out, then I'm more than happy to sort of do that. Yeah.
yeah. No, I mean, very, very fair. But I do think it does kind of crack me up a little bit because I do feel like bookish people, both readers and writers, are very introverted for the most part, and so
Yeah.
this part of it is always kind of a big ask and a big
Well, it's
shove on the
right.
extroverted
It's
part,
not
you know?
really. It's not a big ask. It's actually we should be flattered, and I'm sure most of us are flattered to
Yeah,
be asked and to have the opportunity to chat. Some of it you wonder, are you doing more harm than good, right? You're like, oh, I meant to sort of be here to, I guess, to some degree, drive more attention towards the book, positive attention. So yeah, I mean, normally it doesn't go that way, thank goodness, but yeah, I think it is as I get older, there's a push and pull between being more less not less outgoing. I suppose that's not the right word, but yeah, just doing less of these. And it's only, I think it's just simply because, I've just gotten, um, I, it's just, I've done so many of them and
yeah,
I'm grateful to do them. And I really am sincerely grateful to talk especially like younger, because again, I think a podcast is generally most of the people I speak to are like young readers, young creatives, young podcasters, interviewers. And I think so much of the genre right now, it really does. Sometimes I feel at 50, like, oh man, like it's moved on in a way that it has to. The genre has to move
yeah.
forward and new sort of aesthetics have to come to the fore. Like again, I'm taking my son, it's his birthday tomorrow, and I'm taking him to him and his buddies to Backrooms,
Oh, nice.
which is awesome. And I love it. You know what I mean? I love those types of movies, but I also feel like a movie like Backrooms, the whole liminal horror idea, back when I was in the 80s, it wasn't even really that I don't think I could have scrounged every single paperback rack looking for that kind of an idea, and I don't think I would
Yeah,
have found it, right? So it is, the genre's moving forward. What scares people, I think, to a degree, is moving forward. And you can do your best to keep pace with it, but at the same point, you recognize that like you are cut from your vintage and your generation, and the horror that you sort of grew up on and cut your teeth on, is in some ways the horror that moves you forward and moves your own stuff forward, and you realize that, like, I did an event with Marcus Klewer, the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
caretaker. Awesome. But
Hmm.
again, he is like from the Reddit kind of
Yeah,
school
that
of
creepy
horror.
pasta kind of.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's awesome. I mean, like, literally, I'm with it in terms of like enjoying it and understanding how nuanced and interesting it is. But where I just sit down and try and write it myself, I think I'd run into a bit of a generational handcuff, in that I wouldn't quite be able to do it because I wasn't born and I didn't come from that.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. And there's a couple things I want to hit on that you brought up, but I think most of all, I think you're being very humble. I think that we're all human here. And I know that I think in doing the interviews that I do and doing the podcast, my eyes have just been opened so much to like the life cycle of a book
Mm,
and the way that everything plays out for authors and creativity and kind of that complex that your idea and your creative ideas go through. So that's always what I'm really interested to talk to authors about because I think it's a really hard push and pull to be so creative and to be passionate. And then you're kind of, there's a corporate business factor of all this as well, which is really interesting to talk about sometimes too. But I
mhm,
also want to, one, wish your son a happy early birthday, but two, the whole backrooms thing, I think that there's a certain like I don't know if decay is the right word. But the liminal space thing I think is only made possible because in the 80s and 90s to an extent, there was people everywhere. And then now that
mm,
we see with the move to everything online, there's no longer people everywhere. And you
mhm.
get these spaces that should be full of life and should be full of all of these things, and they no longer are. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the part of it that gets to me so bad. But I totally get what you're saying with, like that was it wasn't there,
I don't think
people
so.
were
I mean,
there.
again, somebody who maybe has a even deeper horror sort of knowledge, than me would say, "Oh no, someone back in the '80s wrote a book that, sort of precede." I mean, I think House of Leaves,
Yeah,
to a great degree, probably was on the barrier of that, and I think it probably was pretty prescient in the liminal horror ideas. I mean, to my reading, anyways. But again, I read that when I was probably 25.
hmm,
So I always consider my own sort of horror upbringing to be King and Barker and Rice and
yeah,
Kuntz and that kind of the generation that I sort of nurtured myself on, for lack of a better word. And so my own horror generally springs out of that. But again, I think I can enjoy horror that preceded me, like 70s and 60s horror. And I
absolutely.
definitely, went and saw Weapons or Obsession, and I can totally see like, oh yeah, I'm right there. Like I'm enjoying it. I can see why it's working. I'm not sure I could enter that kind of headspace because it's a definitively youthful headspace, and that's,
Yeah.
I think, where those ideas are springing from.
Well, it's really, you could not have given me a better opener or a segue to
Oh,
talk about your book, The Dorians, honestly. Because this is a book that is kind of about like that fountain of youth idea
hmm
and science gone a little too far. It's about some elderly folks who were kind of ready to pull the plug on things who weren't doing too well, and they get presented with an opportunity to try something new, to turn back the clock, so to speak. They
hmm
decide to do it, and events ensue is always the best way that I like to leave some synopses on the table, so I don't spoil things. But this conversation that we're having kind of about your relationship of what you can kind of gravitate to in horror and like, the nexus of your stories that you build out of. What was that for the Dorians? Like, do you remember where the idea that you wanted to tell this kind of story came from?
Um, I think, Anna, again, there's probably a few vectors that sort of led to this book. One is that I am speaking to you now as a 50-year-old, so that's the book was written preceding that, but I knew in terms of the publication calendar that I would be 50 by the time it came out. But even writing it in my late 40s,
Hmm.
I'm in that vintage where I have people have lost parents. I have not yet, but definitely my parents are elderly. I have lost friends, even of my own generation, a cohort that was obviously a shock to lose someone in their 40s or 50s. But I'm old enough that we've actually lost from our own roll call, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not a sort of an idea that would have come to me when I was in my 20s because I was healthy. I wouldn't even think of things like mortality in a real sincere way. My parents were healthy. Everybody's parents, of my friends were, you know what I mean? It just wasn't I was much more interested in other things, some of which seem quite inessential now, but that's part of growing up, I think. Um, and Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like the groundhog getting pulled out of its burrow and shook around, and where did this come from? And because I was thinking about it, and I grew up in Calgary, which is
Hmm.
a city on the western part of Canada. And we had a house that bordered a green belt that led down to a nature preserve area, and it had like a waist high, higher than waist high chain link fence. And we'd go out for walks, and my dad would do this thing where he'd kind of feint towards the gate, and then he would grab the top of the fence and he would vault
Hmm.
over it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, which me seeing it as a 6 year old or whatever I was, it felt like magic. It was like the most elegant, graceful application of movement that his body could possibly do, I think. And we're not a graceful people, but he did marshal all of whatever grace and natural ability he had it to make this beautiful little leap. And and I think I would my belief is that I probably thought at 6 years old that he would always be able to do that,
Yeah.
and I would think that actually this fence will rust and it will rot back into the earth, and the houses around it will all go back to the earth before my dad will ever not be able to make this leap. Um, and I think I have a 6 year old daughter, and probably when I pick her up at this point, I hope really that she thinks, oh yeah, dad will always be able to do this, make me have this like momentary weightless feeling as he lifts me up. We know that that's simply not, that's one of the hard truths as you barrel towards, adolescence and certainly and into adulthood. So, I think, you having read the Dorians, the Faustian bargain that is offered to the characters in this case, and most Fountain of Youth stories ultimately focus around some kind of Faustian bargain, often given to the characters at a point of their most vulnerable, point in their existence. I think if I told my daughter Charlotte, like, hey, how would you like to like live forever in a youthful state? I don't think she would understand the bargain that she had been,
Yeah.
asked to potentially embrace. And this is hard for me to think of, but when she'd be 90, I'd be long gone, obviously. But if someone came to her and made her that same, gave her that same opportunity, I think there'd be a very different answer, and she'd have to think about it in a much different way. So I think those are sort of the things that little vignette of my father and some of the stuff to do with my very young children, I think probably pushed me in the direction of this, conceiving this novel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's something that we all kind of contend with at various points in our lives. And, like at the reason that we call it the Fountain of Youth thing is because it's been done. Like we've,
Mhm.
kind of revisited. But what I really appreciate about the Dorians is you put very much your own spin on it, and it is very much, your own version of that kind of bargain, so to speak. But yeah, there's a excuse me, a real poignancy to the little moments where you realize you're like, this isn't gonna
Mhm.
hold up, And it's like a few things, like it's even my grandmother who like she can't take the stairs anymore. And like we used to travel a lot with her. And so like factoring in where we can't go, or, what we can do now because she can't use, like, it's those things that you don't realize, like the I walked up my last set of stairs with my grandma, that kind of thing, that always kind of really pulls on your mindset to think about, well, if we could get a little bit more time, that would be great. And it's not something that, like I don't think that I would have thought about, a couple of years ago, but now that we are going through this, it certainly is something that I think about. And it's kind of one of those things that you can't unring that bell once you are introduced to that fact of life, which is really, really interesting because, like you said, as children, we don't fully grasp that or understand that. We always think it's going to be fine and it's going to be okay. And there is something a little, to me, a little horrific about, you can't put that toothpaste back in that tube,
Mhm.
and I was curious for you if during the drafting process of that novel, if how it felt to kind of sit with a lot of those feelings, because you're contending with the slow death, the aging, like this forward momentum that we cannot stop. Except in your book, there is allegedly a way to stop it, but
Right.
still to sit with those ideas, how did that feel?
Yeah. I mean, I did do a lot of thinking, and probably in the research, some of the research was into gerontology, and it was into people who were interested in life extension. And like years ago, um, I did an article, years before that, I did an article for Esquire where I had taken steroids, and it was for a book, a Craig Davidson book that I had written, and I thought this character is not working. I had been told actually by my editor that the character wasn't working. And I thought, well, what better way to activate this character than have him do steroids? And what better way to fully understand how this character ran through his steroid journey than to do steroids himself? So it was a very George Plimpton-esque idiocy that I embarked on when I was younger. And and then when I finished the cycle, it didn't help the book at all. I should say. But it was such an odd experience that I sat down and wrote like a nonfiction sort of like, here, this is how my it felt taking steroids for 6 weeks or whatever I did it. And I sent it out at the time to, Men's Health and GQ and places like that. And then I largely forgot about it because I just didn't hear back, and I assumed that, like most of the stuff I sent out back then, I was sending it into a black hole. But I did come home to my house at some point. It wasn't an editor from Esquire, and he said, like, this ended up on the slush pile, and it got pulled off the slush pile, and it kind of went from desk to desk to desk until it ended up on mine, and I actually want to publish it. So great, we did that, and we kept in touch, and I pitched him different things over time. He never took to any of them, which was fine, but we stayed cordial. And then years later, Barry Bonds was going through a steroid scandal, and he thought, oh, this HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is really popular right now, and could we get you to write an article about that? And I said, yeah, for sure. So I ended up doing a lot of research, going to hormone replacement therapy offices essentially, and talking to the doctors there and talking to the patients. And one of the main things that they said is that, they don't want to live to 150. They would just like to live to 85 in good health. So it's
Mm-hmm.
more like health span was the term that was used a lot. It wasn't lifespan, it was health span.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting. But then I ended up speaking to people who were on a further down the rabbit hole, who espoused the idea to live to 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or potentially forever. And I came away from those conversations mm, with less of appreciation of their outlook, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I actually would be honest and say I felt it kind of selfish, uh,
Yeah.
because when you look at sort of how that the world would look, and we can't know for sure, but sort of the forecasts philosophically and in terms of demographics, um, it'd be a lot of old people. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I say old, I mean like 2,000 years old, and
Yeah.
there'd be almost no children because children would be a luxury because we need all the resources for us, our 5,000-year-old asses, to be tottering around. And I just thought it's what sort of, you know, is that humanity anymore? It's not humanity that you and I would understand. So that, I think, made me understand some of the outlook of the book that you've read. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not really, I would say it doesn't really push towards an idea that eternal life is a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say it more feels that that is a bad idea and potentially a disastrous idea.
Yep.
So that probably comes out of the research, and I think too, I've come out of the writing of it with probably more a deeper appreciation for the time that I have,
Yeah. That
and
makes sense.
that we have. Human lives are kind of seasonal. I look at it now. It's like in our spring we're young and children, and we're growing, and we're like blasting off in all directions, and then in our summer we kind of like focus that intensity of the youth and drive it towards whatever ambition that we want to accomplish, and then fall we kind of gain some wisdom and understanding and maybe seek to nurture life ourselves. And then, in winter we become lions and lionesses in winter, and that's like probably some of the more heartbreaking uh passage of human life, or the time span of human life. And yet, ideally you can look back over the life that you've led, with a certain reflection and pride of the things that you've done and the love that you've given, and don't aspire to go beyond that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's partially because I know from everything that I've read and learned, having written this book, that we are not anywhere near, you know, being able to live much longer than what our given parameters are at the moment. So now, again, if someone comes to me at 90 and says, "Do you want to reevaluate your thinking?" I might, you know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
know. I can't speak from how my future self might react to some of these things. But if you're asking me right now, yeah, my idea is that to use the time we're given, I think most of all, and enjoy
Yeah.
it as much as we can.
It's that quality of life factor that you brought up in that research, like that health quality, or the extension
Hmm.
of health rather than necessarily the extension of age. And I think that that's something that, we don't, whenever we think about the fountain of youth, we think about it numerically and as an extension of years. But it really is about being able-bodied and feeling
Hmm.
okay and being, and that, you do a really brilliant thing with your characters. There's five of them. There's Claire, there's Madeline, Teddy, Hugo, and Frank, and each of them are kind like, one of them has Parkinson's, one of them has Lyme disease. So not only were we contending with age for these characters, I mean they are all, all older, but we're talking about people whose quality of life has been limited due to a condition that sometimes comes about because of old age. Sometimes, I mean, Lyme disease, you can get that whenever.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a really interesting way to kind of view this crux. And the other thing that you really, you write them all very well with different personalities
Mm.
and different histories, I think is the important thing, because there is one character in particular, Hugo, I believe, if I remember correctly. I don't understand why he would want to live much longer whenever he's plagued with the things that he is, like the memories that he
Yes.
has of certain things.
Hmm.
And it was one of those thought experiments that I had about quality of life and extension of life, and is it really a good idea when life is like that? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that's what the real joy of the book in a weird way was that and again, we want to get out of spoiler territory, and I don't think I'm going to go into it. But they do come. They come in they come in broken to the point that they've all accepted MAID, which
Yeah.
in Canada here has become legal. And it's not like you can wake up at 25 on a sunny day and say, "Oh, I feel ennui. I think I need to end things." There's a very big legal sort of process you need to go through, but it is available. It has become available, but too much, consternation from certain quarters, I think reasonably so. But that these characters would have consented to that, obviously says that not only are they old, but the pain that they are living in, and the sense of their life expectancy is such that they are. We talked about the Faustian bargain. I mean,
Hmm.
the devil is most beguiling when you are most desperate for
Absolutely.
whatever he is offering you, right?
Yeah.
And these characters are definitely in those straits. Um, but because they come in that way, I think it was important to me. It was interesting to me, frankly, it's fun when the Faustian bargain works or the Fountain of Youth works, in a good way. And I like to write the interregnum, I would call it, where things are working,
Yeah.
when they are actually drawing the benefits of this process, and that they are seeing their chronological age recede, and brains are sharpening, their thoughts are sharpening, certain drives are awakening again. Obviously their strength is rallying. They can sort of do the things that they were able to do. My dad leaping over the fence, suddenly he'd be able to do that again.
Hmm.
And it's unnatural, and it's wrong. It's like, um, a wave going in the wrong direction or something. It's something that would feel very weird to be trapped in or to look at. And I think the other characters sort of notice that,
Yeah,
really,
yeah, yeah.
the unnaturalness of this process and the way that it is sort of altering these people. They don't notice it. I think they're only intrigued and really, quite frankly, probably addicted to the benefits that they are receiving. So that all that said, it was really fun actually to write, because you, like, in horror, that's almost the way it goes too. Like, things are good.
Yeah, things get
You
better before
have
they
that
get
that
worse. Yeah.
yeah, you give the characters, before things go bad, before events happen, where things are, they get to sort of come together and have, like, you get to look towards a possible future where this could all work out, and then, being it that it's a horror book, it's not going to end that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Well, there's, I've read, The Queen by you. I really, really love that book. And I love the way that you wrote and you structured that book. And I'm also a really big X-Files nerd.
Mm.
So in any kind of like government interference or like lab interference, that whole like mad science going wrong. It's like it's really I am a sucker for it every time. I don't know what it is about me, but I just love it. And you kind of created the situation for all of those characters that we just talked about in their different, areas and stages of life with their different conditions for them
Mhm.
to receive this experimental treatment and for them to enjoy kind of their quote unquote youth a bit again. But, I kind of want to talk to you about leaning on the science and the, I don't know if it's technically sci-fi, and I don't, quite frankly, it doesn't really matter. But, kind of approaching the story with that way, because I think that a lot of times there's almost like I don't know if folklore is the right word, but there's a different approach to, I think, looking at age. But I really
Mhm.
appreciated this like science-based kind of, the whole setup that you had with it, the science gone wrong, the Frankensteinness of it all,
Mhm.
that I really, really enjoyed. So I kind of just wanted to talk to you about that choice to frame it in that way.
Yeah, I think it probably just naturally occurred to me that if I was going to write a Fountain of Youth story, because you're right, often folklore or fairy tale even,
Yeah.
the you get a weird vial of something and you drink it and you're like, oh, this doesn't work, and then you wake up the next morning and like, oh, I'm young, and there doesn't need to be, because the parameters of those stories are it's magic essentially. And I wanted to sort of see if I could figure out a way to tell a Fountain of Youth story with some grounding in science. I mean, when I say grounding, it can be quite loose. But I did discover um, these jellyfish. These two, one is actually called the Hydra, which is what I
Hmm.
what I named the one in the book, and the other one is called the Medusa, which I tossed around. That would have been a good one too. They're both really kind of creepy names.
Yeah.
But both of them are what we call biologically immortal. I think they're the only two creatures on Earth who are biologically immortal, which is to say they have a life process that kind of rejuvenates themselves from their old self. And I mean, the way it would work in a human, I've tried to think about it, but it would be like my at some point when I get really old, my finger would say break off, and the rest of me would go off and die. But from my finger would grow a fetus, and from the fetus, I would just regenerate myself.
Hmm.
And this would be in a stable environment. These creatures could just live, until the sun burnt out, basically.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that would be something that it's same within the troop tapeworms. There's something that just hits you, and then you're grafting characters to it, and you're also like, okay, is this possible? And so that was probably the next step. I found these little critters, and I thought, well, okay, has anyone done any research about, like, can we as humans harness the mighty power of the jellyfish? Um, and we can't. But there are researchers. The main guy is in Japan, but he is evidently very difficult to reach. He just lives out on the edge of the ocean, just him in a shack and his tide pools and his jellyfish. And I can't speak Japanese anyway, so that was not going to work. We weren't going to be able to hold a palaver. But there were two gentlemen in America who were happy to talk to me. And I do find these guys generally are quite happy to talk to you. They're almost like mystified that you want to talk to them. Like, okay. Oh, really? Me? Yeah. So yeah, and I explained, what I was trying to do, and obviously I'm going to be taking liberties here, and I mentioned Michael Crichton, who was obviously a huge influence on this book, and how elegantly, sort of with Jurassic Park, he took science that I think at the time when he was looking into it, people were really looking at, you know, um, blood in mosquitoes that had been frozen in amber, and can we, obviously it's been proven that that's not possible, but what Michael Crichton always does so elegantly and amazingly is that he makes it believable, and he can also sort of move through really interesting scientific processes without necessarily sacrificing any kind of plot momentum. So I sort of took that as my marching orders. I'm like, I was told no. Well, these are very rudimentary organisms, and we are very complex organisms, the most complex organism, and there's no way that their powers can be vested in us. That said, you know, they both said fictionally it'd be really interesting. I said, well, okay, great. That's great.
That's the green light that you need.
Right, yeah, that's exactly some of it. That's it, just like give me permission. So that's sort of what I embarked on, is this notion that this scientist whose name I think you mentioned, Astrid.
Yeah.
has come up with, and you're right, with the help of a shadowy and sort of unnamed organization, um, this absolutely revolutionary technology that, if properly implemented, has the potential to reverse human age. and
Yeah.
and that's sort of what I set out with, and spend the early part of the novel kind of, again, introducing the characters and introducing the science. And to me, it's like, you're pulling the ripcord on something, and then you sort of let it go off into its craziness later on.
Yeah, I mean it's really kind of fun though, I think, to find the thread of truth and to kind of pull on it and let it be unraveled in the way that we can do with horror and sci-fi and, sometimes fantasy, all this kind of stuff. Because there is a thread of truth in all of it. I mean, like you said, there are these jellyfish. And who's to say that something won't be harnessed later on down the line? Like
No.
nothing shocks me at all anymore whenever it comes to
Oh, if you
science.
showed someone like from the 1930s a cell phone, they would think
Yeah.
it's alien technology. So yes, we are shockingly able as humankind to like make vast leaps of technology, and not always to the best. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
another part of Crichton that I've probably adopted, or a mindset I would say that we share, in that generally the Crichtonian um, novels, I mean, in the hands of another writer, Jurassic Park could have been like, "Oh, come to my island. Oh, great. These are awesome. You've got dinosaurs here, and there's no Nedry's not running around being an idiot, and there's not a storm and a power cut, and they don't run wild." And just like, great, thanks for coming to my island. Please come back. It'll be open and everything will be wonderful. But it's not. It's Crichton who did Westworld and who did many things that way. And I think he's naturally, I don't know, a pessimist. I'm not sure if that's the right way of saying it, but he probably um, felt the way that I do about, the archetypal mad scientist, which is sometimes we
Yeah.
start from an objective of purity and a real vested ambition to help humanity, to move us forward, but hubris often gets involved, and then we get Frankenstein, which, again,
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever been better done than Mary Shelley did when she wrote
Yeah.
that at 19 or 18 or wherever she did, but she broke the mold with, not only with Victor Frankenstein, the character, the archetypal mad scientist, but really with the idea of creating beyond your means to control, and then
Hmm.
and then abandoning the thing that you have created, um, when it doesn't go your way or when it doesn't live up to your ambitions.
Yeah, it's the cruelty, right, of
Hmm.
Dr. Frankenstein looking away from the monster. That one line is always she can't you can't even look at the thing anymore. So,
Hmm.
it sticks for a very long time for horror fans. But, it's funny that you bring up this thing with Crichton, and, it could have been like a day at the zoo, for lack of better words. It's a great
Yeah.
day. Everybody comes to check out the dinosaurs. But I think that what horror writers do best is, we would all make probably really great risk analysts because we all see everything that
Hmm.
could go wrong.
That's
I
right.
mean, of course, we would say that everything is very risky and very terrible, so maybe we wouldn't. But, if you want some hypotheticals, I feel like, we're all pretty good at spitting those out as quickly as you'd like.
Agreed. Agreed. I think that's our stock and trade, really, is we'd be writing in a different genre if we're looking for the utopian. I think we're generally looking for the dystopian.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And, you brought up Astrid, who is the scientist at the heart of this, who's, like really pioneering this. There is another character that's introduced later, and I don't think it's as much of a spoiler to say, but her name is Ingrid, and Astrid and Ingrid are the same age. They're
Mhm.
like 19. I am so curious, and I don't want this question to come off as like, well, why did you choose to write women? Because that's not what I'm asking at all. But I do find it very interesting, and I think maybe it's because the last thing I read of yours was The Queen. That's
Mhm.
another very female-centered, female experience-centered book, and I
Mhm.
thought it would be really easy to slot in a man who has benefited from the patriarchy or from like a lot of those gender norms in this mad scientist position that you
Mhm.
have Astrid in. So I was just kind of curious a little bit, I guess, in a way, why you did choose to write about women,
Yeah, no, it's
in this
reasonable.
spot.
Yeah, reasonable question, and reasonable, like, yeah, why? Probably it might have been in a first draft. Um, it was a guy.
Yeah.
It was a 19-year-old man, and then for whatever, and Ingrid would have been maybe, I'm not sure if I even made it that far to
Yeah.
introduce before I actually backfilled and said, you know what, no, I like it better. I like this character better as a young woman. Um, so as to, some of it's instinctive, and sometimes your instincts can guide you in directions that they shouldn't, frankly. So I mean, that's probably to go back to the beginning of our speak talk, like how is it going? Like, well, you're basically, here you've baked this pie, and you're presenting to everyone, and some people are like, that tastes awful, and why did you use that ingredient? And you're like, well, I don't know, I thought cinnamon and uh, you know, uh, some other, apricot would go really well together. No, they don't. That's a bad choice. Um, but so I think maybe partially because I had written The Queen, preceding it, it just felt right to me, um, to make them young women,
Yeah.
I don't know why exactly that choice was made, and I do definitely now remember that I changed from a young boy genius to a young girl genius or woman
Mhm.
genius. um I think one question I've had so far is why make her young at all?
Yeah.
Why not vest it in your more classical, mad scientist who, again, as you say, be a 30, 40-year-old guy, essentially, maybe like the character in The Deep,
Hmm.
um, or kind of the character even in the troop who's hovering around the peripheries as the architect of all that misfortune. Um, and that's an easier question to answer, and it's not quite so instinctive. It's more that you're dealing with really old people, and then you're putting the power over them in the hands of a very young, and uh, in some ways very mistrustful and like smarter than her own good to a
Oh
degree.
yeah. Well, she's out of touch. She's not.
Out of
She's
touch,
not in touch at all.
right, has grown up at such a level and has such a level of intelligence that really separates her from humanity. Like, she probably in some ways is not really quite human, if that's maybe a cruel thing to say, because intelligence shouldn't separate you from humanity, but I think she has separated herself in a way, through this. She just exists at this elevated level of intelligence where I think she sacrificed a great deal of her morality, obviously, and is willing to sort of make compromises, which end up getting echoed by the characters who again, you know have a reversion themselves, and kind of going back to a more impulsive adolescence, and thus are making decisions and doing things in the latter half of the book that they would never have done in the early part of the book. But there's all sorts of reasons why they would. But yeah, I think it's like when the student becomes the teacher,
Yeah.
that inversion is weird. I remember, like, even in class when you'd have like one of the, some like 14-year-old who was really feeling himself and would start to talk back to the teacher,
Yeah.
and then some other people would kind of join in a weird way, and you're like, you felt like the molecules of the room changing, because like, this is not the way it should be. I actually, I know I'm supposed to stress against the teacher, but I don't actually want him or her to get unseated, because then we're in like a chaotic place where I don't feel comfortable or safe.
Yeah, the social norms are completely broken at that
Mhm.
point, and it throws
Exactly.
everything off kilter for like it's harder to, I think it's harder to discern that reasoning of like why it doesn't feel right other than it's just not, because it's just not the norm.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, so you just brought back a memory from me from middle school. We had like a student transfer into our math class, and we had a super strict math teacher, and this kid just got up and he's like, "You're doing it wrong," and like got up and like went to the board, and like, and everybody in the class was just deadly silent. It was like you could hear a pin drop, because it's like, you don't
Right.
do that here,
Yeah,
you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And that's very much kind of, a little bit of the feeling that we get with Astrid kind of
Mhm.
running the show. But it's really interesting that you bring up the youthful age thing with her, because I understand that the age thing is obviously like a huge building block of this novel. But whenever I read her, it was more of a personality thing that I read with her character, of like who she was integrally, as we read about, some events that unfold, in the past and all that kind of stuff, for her. But she kind of cracked me up a little bit in a way, because she has such like a biblical sense of her own judgment and her
Mhm.
own, like what she thinks is right is and wrong, and like it's very quick to escalate.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where, she herself feels like she has grown up in a lab away from all common sense based intelligence. Like, probably could not navigate a city if you dropped her in the middle of it to like ask for directions, but
Hmm.
could solve every like quadratic equation that you threw at
Yes.
her. You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah.
always, to me, that's always something really interesting to kind of think about character wise when it does come to intelligence and personality and kind of how all that combines, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think my editor asked something like, was she neurodivergent or uh, on the spectrum somewhere? And I mean, these were not thoughts while I was writing it. Once again, you start getting eyes on it from other people, and they bring their opinions and thoughts. And it's best, especially in the editorial process, to like, okay, I'm taking that on board. I'm listening to it. My sense was more like you.
Yeah.
She's built to a mean utility would be the point.
Yeah.
She has built herself to like this perfect place of like, this is what I'm good at, and I'm better at it than anybody else in the world, and better at it than like anybody, who probably in ensuing generations is gonna like. That's how I saw her myself.
Hmm.
And because she recognizes that, and because she recognizes the power of that, she's become imperious, and she's become somewhat like the math teacher that you mentioned, who runs that very, and like, you don't you don't take dissent, because dissent
Yeah.
is where chaos will start, and so you operate with a very, very heavy hand. And in this case, she's operating with a very heavy hand against, I mean, yes, her sort of functionaries or who are around her, but also against people who could be her grandparents.
Yeah.
And there's just something terrible about that.
Yeah, she's just a really interesting character for me to think about because it's a little bit of that like nature versus nurture argument that you're like, like what's this girl's past, like what she's been through to get her to this point, and because her intelligence is her only identity point that we see, like she takes
Mhm.
so much pride in her intelligence. So of course, any little chink in the armor to her intelligence is gonna send her over the edge because it's the only
Yes.
thing she knows about herself.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
It's
And
her
she's
whole
dealing with
personality.
this, and she has bitten off more than she can chew. I don't think that's a spoiler to say, but
Yeah,
she is meddling in the way that Victor Frankenstein and Moreau meddle in the stuff of life, which is like, however intelligent you are still a dwarf, and your intelligence is dwarfed by Mother Nature, and what and the natural order. I think that often that's, once again, with the mad scientists, they are seeking to unseat the order of nature. And you would think that in general, nature does not want to be defied or denied in that way. They are the ultimate imperious teacher, and they're kind of eternal. And so, yeah, and so she's, again, in this way, she's bitten off more than she can chew. And when she finds things going sideways, this is another part of the mechanics of plot, simply. And it's good to have a
yeah,
mad scientist, because a less mad scientist would say, you know what, let's pack up shop. We're done here. But a true mad scientist is hubristic enough to think, no,
can't let
let's
go.
just, exactly, let's stay the
Yeah,
course. I'm going to fix this. I alone can fix this. And they discover they can't do that. But too late. So yeah,
yeah.
those are the kind of characters that are like mother's milk to a horror writer.
Yeah, no. I mean that ego kind of examination of how big that ego can be and all that is just truly it's really really great. It's really fun to read about. I don't know what it says about me that I really enjoy it, but I
No, me
certainly
too.
do.
I like writing it. So.
Yeah, and that it brings me to one other point of this book that I felt like there are times when I can feel where a writer is having fun with something.
Mhm.
In the bits where you were exposing the lab and the science, I can tell like your research is definitely coming out. That's like really apparent and that's really great to see. But there's also, we talked about this a little bit already, but when our older characters start to kind of grow younger, so to speak, with the effects of this experiment they revert back to being almost like teenagers in some
Yeah,
ways. And
yeah, yeah.
those scenes I was giggling at a few, just some of the dialogue, some of the internal thoughts, some of the social dynamics were also really, really interesting to read about. So I want to ask, like, I'm assuming that you had fun with those scenes and kind of
Wow.
revisiting what it's like to go through. It's almost like puberty once again, but
Yeah, yeah. I
you
think
know,
I mentioned somewhere, Astrid has her logs essentially, and I think I put somewhere that there's a real activation in certain, centers of the brain, which are based on impulsivity, and generally haven't been activated since adolescence, and they're coming
yeah.
back into the fore. So that to me was like, gave me license to sort of write some of these scenes that you're talking about. Yeah, because I was talking to someone else earlier today about it, and she asked, how do you being a horror writer in general, not specifically this book, but just, you must, how do you exit your writing room and sort of just take, re-engage in your life, without carrying around all this darkness. And I'm like, I had to be honest. I said, my wife will come up and, hang outside the room that I do my writing with and just, sort of linger, and she'll hear me cackling like an idiot in there, you know? And because I am having fun, there's a scene I remember in this book where it's Hugo and Teddy, and they're trying to like activate the Hydra essentially, and they're just, yeah, right, they're just, and I'm just like, that's just a fun scene. I mean, I enjoyed writing it anyways, and so like those are fun, and sometimes even frankly the scenes that go way too far are fun in a different way. I've said
Yeah.
with the troop, um when I wrote that, I was shocked anyone wanted to publish it. I just thought like this goes way too far, like there's
Yeah.
just no way. So since then I've sort of considered I have carte blanche to write, mostly what I want. And thankfully, yeah, my editor and publishers are have always been really cool. I've never been asked to like not write something or get rid of this. Or I mean, we do, there's interplay, you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely listen to them. And if there's something that they feel is not working, I'm definitely willing to get rid of it or amend it. But I've never been told outright like this is going too far, essentially.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, so she'll hear me cackling, but she'll also find me, there are moments where she'll find me weeping, for lack of a better word, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's, I've always done that. We've known each other, my wife and I have known each other since we were in college together in creative writing, and she would have seen me that way, frankly, when I was, in my late early 20s. So it's always been a part of, I think, what I like about writing is that if you're fortunate enough to get in the seam of it with these characters and with this story, you're gonna laugh like a loon, and you're gonna find yourself, the characters in some way kind of writing, stepping just slightly ahead of your pen, for lack of a better word, or your keystrokes, whatever, and sort of activating their own inner selves, and you're just kind of holding on for the ride. And then when you have to say goodbye to some of them sometimes, if you've done it right, at least to your own sense of it, you're going to have an emotional reaction to that too, because you've walked around with them for 8, 9 months, a year, something like that. And so that's all part of the, I think, of the joy of being a writer. And as I get older, the joys, you got to take them where you can find them.
No, absolutely. Yeah. You talk about being in lockstep a bit, or, your characters being maybe a little bit ahead of you, but I find whenever you get those reactions, whenever you're writing, or at least from the authors that I've talked about, like that's whenever your empathy, or your, like whatever you want to call it, is really in line, and you're really present with the work, which is, a really, I think, a really big thing, to be that present with your work at the time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, my favorite thing about kind of talking to horror authors is the fun that they have in writing the horror. But
Right.
that my favorite thing I think about the horror genre, and don't get me wrong, there's like, horror fantasy, and there's all kinds of other subgenres where it's not as rooted in a reality that we know, but there are still ground rules that you set for any plot or any
Sure.
narrative that you have to anchor your story to, right?
Agreed.
But horror is the one kind of the one area where you just let her rip. It doesn't have to necessarily make sense, especially
No,
whenever you're talking
no.
about what humans experience. Like I read a passage in a book about what a dream feels like, and it doesn't have to obey the law of physics because you're conveying a feeling. And so
Mhm.
those are the fun moments, in my opinion, is the letting go of the rules and just getting to go and run wild as you'd like.
Yeah, yeah. I think horror uh, does great with like empty spaces or
Yeah.
spots between. And again, some readers will feel cheated. They'll feel that the writer doesn't know what he or she is doing, and that's why that kind of those vacancies are there, or the connective tissue, you might say, is frayed. And I think my horror probably doesn't bend towards that kind. Like I love reading it. I'm not. I'm more like a declarative, like A meets B meets C.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But when it's done really well, and there's many practitioners who do it really, really well, and it's a staple of horror, as you say, is kind of that, like the lack of needing to clarify it is actually what sends the shiver that unseats the reader.
Yeah.
It makes them unsure. And it's you have to be, there's a certain masterfulness that you need to sort of to walk that line properly. But when writers do it properly, it's amazing. I agree with you.
Yeah, 100%. And I finally want to bring us a little bit to the end of the novel, and I, certainly don't want to spoil anything, but I did really appreciate the ending of this novel for very many reasons. There was, enough action and excitement that things kind of came to a head, but there was also some things left dangling, so to speak, that you can
Mm.
kind of sit with and think with. Did you always know that you kind of wanted to end the book in this way, or was it, I'm always very curious how authors end on their end land on their ending, so to speak, because it's always like threading the needle, that final moment, that last stitch where you're trying to, you don't always want to button everything up, and that decision to me always feels very crucial. So I would love to hear kind of how you landed on the ending of this novel.
Yeah, I think like in most of mine, I'm not exactly sure where I'm gonna land. I know I had a writing teacher once who said, um, write your story and then edit it and then get rid of the last scene.
Oh,
So
interesting.
end on the
Yeah.
scene before or end on a kind of a almost a visual sometimes cliffhanger
Hmm.
that leaves things unclear. And I think that's kind of how I ended the troop. It just sort of Max is looking over the side of the boat, and it's not really clear. And some people consider that a cop out. Some people consider that like it's not you're not properly sending the book off, and some in the worst case scenario feel that they've been cheated of the 350 pages they've read up until that point because you've sort of really bedeviled them with the ending. So it's a risk that you take, and you can never know what readers are going to bring to the book and what expectations they have. But um, I don't always do that, obviously, although I have, and I think maybe this was a literary writer who told me that, but I think it works probably as well in horror for the reasons that we sort of spoke before of that lack of clarity and
Yeah.
necessarily needing to tie up everything with a nice clean bow. But this one ended initially, I will tell you, Anna, that pretty much everybody didn't survive. So
Yep.
I'm trying to avoid spoilers. And I left two characters in a very precarious situation that I think readers probably would have assumed that they would be not make it.
Hmm.
And then the final, and that's how the first version ended. Uh,
Yeah.
and then the ensuing edit, I thought, you know what? It would be interesting to bring those two back. Not for any kind of like, it's not like, well, let's have a sequel. It's like, let's have the
Yeah.
man reach up out of the grave and like, yeah, okay, number two coming soon. It wasn't that. It was more just like the big part of those characters, I think, was their moral certainty, which they held up and would have given the reader every reason to believe that they were going to carry through with that. And then to discover that they hadn't, both speaks to, I think, the power of the thing within them and its ability to sort of alter their thought patterns and maybe their own basic survival instincts and their unwillingness to sort of carry through with this plan that they had set forth. So I mean, again, I mean, some of it you're like, what does it say about me? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What does it, why don't you let them just have the first ending, which at least gives them the moral clarity of their conviction? Why do you have to cheat them of that? Um, but there are readers who have told me that before, amongst other things that they don't like about my work. Would be that they're not that they think I'm cruel, I think maybe, or perverse, and I don't mean to be. I just
Yeah.
I think when I think horror, I think horror.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
and
I think the aesthetic idea is to be kind of bleak, actually, and that unremittingness is maybe not to everybody's favor, but I sort of that's just sort of the way I think.
yeah, well, the thing about it, everybody's allowed to interpret art however they see fit. But I think,
Mhm.
with a book like The Dorians, we kick off with these people who are ready to end their lives, as you said.
Yeah.
Um, and so the idea of morality and what youth and health and age and morality does look like for all of them changes throughout the book.
Hmm.
And I think the way that you chose to end this was very emblematic of the fact that the truth of the matter is, or at least if somebody knows the answer to this question, I haven't heard it. We don't know what to do with morality. We don't know what to do with the fact that we all know that we're dying.
Yeah.
And so I think, we all would like to think that we would know what we would do in certain character situations and those things. But the truth of the matter is, I don't think that we do. And I think that that's the point that the ending, at least for me, really drove home was like, it's one of those things where you sit with it a little bit longer and you
Mhm.
ask the questions about, again, what it says about you and what you maybe think you would do in that situation. And I think that that is kind of, poignant horror and contemporary, in particular, contemporary horror is capitalizing on our current moment, right? And I think that there's a lot, especially with wellness culture right now, with
Mhm.
all of the new advances in medicine that we're seeing that we don't really know all the effects of, but seems helpful, seems harmful. Like all of this stuff feeds into our psyche every day about our health and our longevity. And so I feel like the ending that you wrote is very beneficial to that questioning because we don't know the answer. And I think that that's horrific that we're not going to know the answer, that we kind of have to get through this life figuring it out. It's not easy. It's hard.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll get to the end of it with more questions than
Yeah.
answers, probably. It's just simply we are not, as a species, given enough time. I mean, I can even say that, but it's also the time that we've been granted,
Yeah.
everything on this earth that is sentient in any way has its seasons. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a little about that too, is that I think I enjoy writing characters who feel authentic to the situation that they're in. And in horror,
Hmm.
you're putting these characters in a crucible that is unthinkable. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And the idea that their morality would shift, first of all, is for me is fun to write. That a character that comes into a narrative exits in a vastly different way because of the situations that they've been foisted have had foisted upon them. And that again, to a certain reader, that might seem that there's a puppeteer up there who is pushing consequences and who is forcing these characters into places that forces them to be to exhibit evilness and cruelty that they wouldn't normally. And that actually is not untrue. That's factual. I that is kind of the outlook. But I also think that I want to be strong enough in the understanding that because these are otherworldly
Yeah.
crises that these characters are facing, that they are reacting authentically to how humans probably would. And if they can manage to maintain their morality in a general sense, well, that's great. But if
Hmm.
but if they end up sacrificing it, I don't think they should really be held accountable because they're sort of enduring things that are unthinkable, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. Horror is the one great big hypothetical thought experiment that
Mhm.
nobody has any definitive answer
Yes,
for,
certainly. Yeah, and
honestly.
I should say they're being granted things. They're being offered something that we just simply we will never get, right? So
Yeah.
you're being given this strange bounty, and the understanding that of some readers would be that, well, I would do differently. I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know about myself well enough. I don't know myself well enough to say that in those situations I would behave with a mental clarity and a sort of mental and moral fortitude. And so I kind of like there's almost no character that I've ever written that has done, maybe outside of like Shelley and the Troop, who has done something that some of the core characters that have done something that I would consider to be unthinkable myself were I in those situations, right? So I somewhat right. So I understand, I think I always understand the characters, and I sympathize and empathize with them generally.
Yeah, no, very, very fair. And I appreciate that about your work because I think that that's a very true representation of what it's like to live in the world that we do live in. So,
Right.
but all right, well, we are getting to the top of the hour, so I do want to kind of start wrapping things up.
Mhm.
What else do you have going on in 2026? Is there any other events that we can promote for you? Anything else that you've got going on? Any projects, other releases, anything like that?
Well, there's lots coming. I think there's another three or four Cutter books, and
Right
there's
on.
there's a Davidson book which really really goes into Cutter territory without without me necessarily wanting it to, but I couldn't wrench it out of Cutter territory, so it probably will appeal to people who like the Cutter books.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots, but I think the next one is a four novellas, which will come out in April of 2027, and then pretty much every year after that, for a little while we'll have stuff. So ideally, come back on if you have a chance to read it and you like it, then we can chat again.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. I'm all for that. And is there anything that you're like working? I always like to try and ask what an author is working on now, only if they're allowed to talk about it. Because I know with publishing contracts, sometimes you can't talk about those things. But I am always a little curious, like, once you get done with the Dorians and while you're still promoting the Dorians, where is your
Right.
brain at
Yeah.
creatively?
I think mine's a little different because the work that I have coming, again, the Coffin Worms, and then there's a novel called The Invaders, and then
Yeah.
there's a novel called Gravenhurst.
Killer
And then there's
name. Love that.
two reissues of work, older work. But they're all written.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
they're all written. So I've already written them, and they're really just sort of waiting in line for my editor and I to go over it. So yeah, and right now I'm really not. I think if I do write anything else, Anna, I think I wanna. I keep telling my wife I'm gonna write something happy. I haven't, I haven't
I would
settled
read
on.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I would write it if I could. But the ideas that keep coming into my head are like, well, that's not very happy. So I'm gonna just have to kind of hope that something buoyant and joyous will pop into my head. But I'd like to write something like that because almost as a proof of concept or see if I can do it, frankly.
Very, very, very. Yeah, I think the crux a lot for people who enjoy horror, suspense, thriller, anything like that, and the darker kind of genre stuff is whenever you see a really happy opportunity, like I said, we would make great risk analysts because you can just totally see how to dismantle it, and there's no better ideas for horror than in those situations,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
exactly.
So I understand that struggle. Thank you so much, though, for your time. This has been a really, really lovely chat. The Dorians is already on shelves from Gallery Books. Everybody should go out and pick a copy. And just thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time.
Listen, my pleasure. Really excellent questions. I really appreciate it. I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
Oh my God, not in the slightest. Another huge thank you to Mr. Nick Cutter, or Craig Davidson, as some may know him, for his time talking about the Dorians and, a few of his other works, just his craft and writing in general. I feel like the troupe is part of the horror resurgence that we've had in the 2020s. And there's so many people that I've got to meet because of that book, and I've talked to because of that book. So it's really cool to get the chance to get to talk to him and interview him about his latest. And I am super pumped for whatever he puts out next. That'll be it for me this week. I will be back next week on Tuesday with another regularly scheduled episode. I'll see about getting a bonus episode out at the end of the week, either on Thursday or Friday, and we'll be rocking and rolling then. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you all want more of Anna Rose Reads and you want access to the Discord channel and some other exclusive perks, please feel free to join the Patreon. I have that linked kind of everywhere. And, it's just a great way to support the show if that's something that you're interested in. But the show will always be free. You can always listen for free. And I am so thankful for everybody who listens. So thank you all so much once again. And I'll chat with y'all soon.